I have built more computers than I can count, and at this point, I could probably do most of a build with my eyes closed. So when the idea landed on my desk to build an entire PC in the third person, the way you'd control a character in a video game, rather than seeing it through my own eyes, my first reaction was that I was wrong about that, and I was wrong almost immediately and quite spectacularly. The setup is simple to describe and deeply strange to actually experience. Instead of looking down at the components in front of me, I would see myself, and my hands, the parts, the whole workspace, from a floating camera angle, exactly the way you'd watch an avatar ding things from a first-person point of view. Every time you reach for a cup, tie a shoelace, or thread a screw, you're operating from behind your own eyes. With depth perception, your nervous system has spent decades fine-tuning. Strip that away and replace it with a slightly delayed, slightly offset external view of yourself. And suddenly, the most routine physical TSK becomes a genuine challenge. Simply picking up a screwdriver suddenly becomes a genuine little puzzle to solve. Reaching for a component you can clear. IC becomes a comedy of missed grabs and overcorrections. I went into this confident, maybe even a little smug, and within about 90 seconds of putting on the glasses, I was reaching for a part on a table and watching my own hand sail right past it, like I was playing a game with too much input lag. This is the full story of what happened when I tried to build a complete, fully working gaming PC, entirely from outside my own body, and what that strange experience ended up teaching me about just how much we quietly take for granted every single time we reach out and use our own hands. The piece of technology that makes this possible is a pair of gaming glasses, the Asus ROG XR-R1. On paper, they are a wearable display, but to a perception-altering device. The core of the glasses is a 240 Hz micro-LED display running at 1080p per eye, which is genuinely sharp and smooth, and they can tint automatically or on demand to adapt to different lighting conditions. That tinting feature is exactly what made the challenge airtight by Kiyo. Keeping the lenses fully tinted, I couldn't simply peek over the top of the frames or catch a glimpse of my real hands underneath, the way you'd instinctively cheat if you could. With them darkened, my ONL camera feed, showing me to myself in the third person. The connectivity is the clever part. These glasses hitch means a modern phone like the iPhone 17 Pro can output a video signal directly down a single cable into the glasses. No bulky extra hardware required. So, the rig was almost absurdly compact. A phone served as the camera capturing me, and that same signal was piped into the glasses on my face, so I could watch D-size, far larger than any monitor, hovering several meters away in my vision. It was genuinely like having a giant theater screen strapped directly to my face, except the only movie playing on it was me, live and in real time, trying very hard not to drop an expensive CPU. Before I get to the chaos, let me walk through what we were actually building, because the parts list matters and it's a genuinely sensible value gaming machine rather than some impractical showpiece. The brain of the system is an AMD Ryzen 7 7700X, an 8-core, 16-thread processor built on the serious gaming and everyday heavy lifting, without ever veering into the wildly expensive flagship territory that the vast majority of people don't actually need or benefit from. Paired with it is a B850 chipset motherboard, which is the kind of board I love recommending because it hits a sweet spot. It brings modern conveniences like Wi-Fi 7 and 2.5's connectivity without the inflated price tag of the top-end boards. For memory, we used a 32 gigabyte kit of DDR5 running at 6,400 megatransfers per second. Honestly, 32 gigabytes is more than this. Tier of system strictly needs, but memory has become so cheap that the extra headroom barely costs anything, and it's worth noting that the non-3D cache Ryzen chips like this one actually benefit a little more from faster memory than their 3D V-cache siblings do. Storage came from a 1 terabyte NVMe SSD, fast, modern, reliable, and the kind of toolless installation that modern motherboards have thankfully made almost common. We went with a Noctua air cooler, the kind of quiet, reliable tower cooler that has earned an almost legendary reputation. And for graphics, an RTX 5060 Ti, the 8 gigabyte edition, which whores the value gaming focus of the whole build. It only needs a single 8-pin power connector to run, which keeps the internal cabling refreshingly clean and simple throughout the whole build. The very first hurdle in a third-person build is something you would never think about normally, which is simply finding and grabbing your parts. Whenever thing you reach for is shown to you from an external angle with a touch of latency, your hand and the target you award it, and watch my fingers close on empty air an inch short or an inch wide. The fix, which I discovered by accident and then leaned into complete was to start moving objects up near my shoulder into the part of the frame where the camera could see them clearly. almost like holding up an item in a game inventory. It looked ridiculous from the side, but it worked. Within a few minutes, I was naturally lifting parts up into view to inspect them, not because I was performing for the camera, but because it was genuinely the easiest way to see what I was doing. The single hardest and most nerve-wracking moment of the entire build was installing the CPU into the socket, drawing up a tiny triangle marker on the corner of the chip with a matching marker on the board, and the pins or contacts involved are unforgiving. Doing that BY feel, and through a delayed third-person view, where my depth perception was essentially useless, was genuinely tense. I lined it up the corner, lowered the chip, did the gentle wiggle test to confirm it was seated flat, and when it dropped it in cleanly, I felt a rush of accomplishment completely out of proportion to the task. I have personally installed hundreds upon hundreds of CPUs over the years. I have genuinely never once been so absurdly proud of a single one of them. Once the CPU was in, the build settled into a rhythm that swung between weirdly meditative and outright disorienting. Installing the memory was a satisfying win, the modules clicking into their slots with that reassuring snap, though lining them up took more into its toolless M2 slot easily, one of the genuine pleasures of modern motherboards. The CPU cooler was the next real test, because mounting a tower air cooler involves aligning screws over the socket and tightening them down in a careful pattern, all while you can't actually look straight down at what your hands are doing. I had to rely on that same trick of orienting by landmarks, picking a corner, getting my bearings, and working methodically rather than trying to rush. The strangest part of the whole experience, and the thing I keep coming back to, is how the disorientation never fully goes away, but your brain does start to adapt to it. There's a real out-of-body quality to watching our self-work. At one point, I caught my own face in the frame from an angle I never see, and it was genuinely jarring, like running into a stranger who happens to be you. Moving my arms in exaggerated ways he helped me stay oriented, almost like a swimmer using their limbs to feel where they are in the water. And the nausea, I won't pretend it wasn't there. The slight mismatch between what my inner ear felt and what my eyes saw produced a low, persistent motion sickness, the same queasy feeling some people get from VR. It ebbed sharply whenever I moved too quickly, or the camera angle shifted unexpectedly, and settling back down again whenever I forced myself to work slowly and deliberately. Then came the part of every build where things get physically awkward, which is moving from assembling the core components on an OpenSurf CE to installing everything into the actual case. The case we used was a mid-tower with tempered glass side panels, several included fans, and room for a full, the ATX motherboard, a perfectly sensible enclosure for a build like this. Mounting the motherboard into the case, connecting the front panel headers, and routing T-heat cables is fiddly enough with normal vision. In the third person, it became an exercise in patience and faith. The front panel connectors are the bane of many a builder's existence, even under ideal conditions, the tiny power, reset, and LED leads that have to go onto specific pins, and the delicate USB 3 header that can be permanently ruined if you mash it on crooked. I had to slow way down, line each one up by eye through the floating display, and trust the process. The power supply instee. Elation involved its own small adventure of figuring out which cables I actually needed. Since this was a unit that had C-ARD, mercifully, only needed that single 8-pin connector, so the final major component went in with relatively little drama. C. Cable management, I will freely admit, was not my finest work that day. Tucking and routing cables neatly relies entirely on fine control and clear sightlines, two things I to get absolutely everything connected and tidy enough that the tempered glass side panel would actually close properly. And on this particular and rather unusual day, that alone was a genuine triumph, well worth celebrating. When the last cable was seated and I finally set my tools down, the moment of truth was the same one that ends every build, the press of the power button and the hell D breath waiting to see whether the machine springs to life. And it did. First try. The fan spun up smoothly, the RGB lighting glowed to life, and the whole system posted exactly as it should have on the very first attempt. T, which after roughly an hour and a half of building essentially blind to my own hands, felt nothing short of genuinely miraculous. There was a specific kind of relief in a first boot success, and doing it under these conditions amplified it enormously. But the truly fitting finale, given the entire premise, was actually playing a third-person game on the very machine I had just built in the third person. There was a poetic symmetry to it that I couldn't resist. I plugged the glasses directly into the finished PC, which is a far better experience than streaming through a phone. You can either connect them straight to a compatible device, or run them through the included control dock with its HDMI and DisplayPort inputs. With the glasses fed directly by the graphics card, the responsiveness transformed. The lag that had made the build such a challenge largely vanished, and the giant floating screen became genuinely pleasant to use. The glasses even offer different display modes. One lets the virtual screen float and follow your head wherever you look, which is what created that third-person effect during the build. And another lets you anchor the screen in a fixed point in 3D space, so you can look away and it stays put, then turn back, and there it is, hanging in the air exactly where you left it. So, what did I actually learn from voluntarily making the most familiar task I know absurdly difficult? More than I expected. The first lesson is a genuine appreciatio for how extraordinary ordinary perception is. Every fluid, effortless motion you make, every accurate grab and confident placement depends on a tightly integrated loop between your eyes, your inner ear, and until you break it. Offsetting my viewpoint by a meter and adding a fraction of a second of delay was enough to turn a master craftsman, if I may flatter myself, back into a fumbling beginner. There's some